Welcome to America Uncanceled. I'm Mercedes Schlapp. It's 2023 and the big blue Democrat-run cities are still crumbling thanks to their radical, woke, progressive policies. Just look at Chicago, New York City, or even San Francisco. Crime is running rampant. Homelessness is skyrocketing and drugs are poisoning our youth. What is being done about this? Well, nothing under the Democrat rule. Here to discuss his new book on the destruction of the once great American cities is radio host and author and a friend of CPAC's and the Schlapps, Jason Rantz. Jason, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let's jump right in to the book. This book, What's Killing America? Inside the radical left's tragic destruction of our cities. What did you find as you were doing the research, as you were investigating?
I found a lot of themes that were happening from Democrat city to Democrat city. Obviously, here in the Pacific Northwest, we were experiencing pretty much an explosion of radical left-wing policies, and they were clearly having some negative consequences. And of course, covering this on television, on my radio show, I'm very well aware of what's going on around the country. And when you take a deeper dive into specifics in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Atlanta, DC, New York, you start to realize that it's pretty much the same policies that have been implemented, certainly under the same ideology, but it's the same policies with same kinds of talking points and narratives trying to justify the changes that we're going through. And of course, the responses to it, the consequences, have been pretty much the same. They've hit individual cities maybe a little bit harder in some places than others, but we've pretty much seen the exact same script unfold all across the city, all across the country in these cities, which is why I ended up writing this book. I don't know how many people realize truly what's going on. Because if you rely, for example, on local media, you'll get transactional stories on everything from crime and homelessness to, housing policies and immigration. But they don't connect dots. They don't tell you that this is happening because this was passed, or this politician is responsible for this outcome. And ultimately, I think that does a disservice to voters who are in positions all the time to make better decisions, and sometimes they're making the wrong ones.
What are the top negative policies? I mean, I'm just thinking, just on the top of my head, defunding the police and that sort of demonization of our law enforcement. And also, what did you find when you are connecting the dots of policies in these cities that really have had a negative impact in increasing crime and really, I would say, almost empowering the criminal?
Yeah, what we've seen across the board in these Democrat-run cities, not just the defund movement, which I think everyone at this point is pretty much on the same page that was a total disaster, but it was some of the policies and initiatives that were enacted around that movement. So for example, when you go ahead and tell folks, we're not going to put you in jail, we're going to put you in restorative justice programs.
Yes.
Well, guess what? They realize they don't even have to attend these restorative justice programs to begin with, and you can just continue that bad behavior. And in What's Killing America, I take you through some pretty egregious examples of people who clearly deserve to be in jail, but were given a light sentence in the form of a restorative justice program, and they end up just afterwards, in some cases, murdering people because we didn't make the smart choice early on. There is especially a problem, and we're seeing this across the country as well, a surge in juvenile crime. And it goes under the exact same category where there are some teenagers who deserve to be punished and put away. I don't have an appetite, you don't have an appetite for this. We don't want to just throw in jail a bunch of teenagers. If you're stealing a Butterfinger from a 7-Eleven, no, you shouldn't be going to jail for that. We can save that person. Restorative justice is meant for someone like that.
Yeah.
But when you're involved in a drive-by shooting, for example, yeah, sorry, I'm done. When you're stealing that Butterfinger with a handgun pointed at the head of the clerk, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to take that risk anymore.
Yeah.
You deserve to be in jail where you can get restorative justice.
But Jason, doesn't this go into more of the fundamental problem of brokenness, right? Like the broken family, the
Sure.
lack of fathers in the homes, these two-parent homes, which I think are so critical, where in essence, and then you also have the phenomenon of what social media is doing to these juveniles, to these kids. So, I mean, how does that play in when you're talking about the fact that the foundation of our civilization, the family, has been pretty much destroyed?
Well, that plays a key role. In one of the chapters I cover in education, where we're pushing BLM principles, which includes basically breaking up the traditional family and looking at it in different ways, I think that that has clearly an effect on society. When we're teaching kids at a young age that there's not an importance to family structures, however even you want to define it, but having like responsible adults in a household who are having kids and you're passing along values and principles that make sense and are to the benefit of everyone. When you're telling these kids that, well, guess what? They grow up and they start having a worldview that's been developed by these radical leftists. When you look at the data is clear. This is not even controversial at this point.
Right.
When you come from broken families, you're at a higher risk of going down the wrong path. That's not to say there aren't some tremendous single parents out there, but the data is what the data is.
You also talk about, the legalization of drugs, I think, is another big issue that could come into play here. I know when I'm walking through DC and really I run into so many of these individuals who are on drugs. I mean, you could smell the marijuana from a mile away, or they're on heroin or on crack. They are just literally just out of it. And you don't see any efforts being done to try to even know how to deal with these individuals. What role are the drugs playing? As we know, we have the increase in fentanyl too in our communities because they're flooding through the border. What have you found there?
Yeah, well, it's a twofold problem. On the one hand, as you just mentioned, we have a porous border, and it's incredibly easy to get fentanyl into this country. The ingredients are coming from China. It is then manufactured by the cartels in Mexico. And because they're so tiny, it's very easy to bring across the border thousands of these pills versus large bricks of cocaine or heroin, which is incredibly expensive to produce, whereas fentanyl really cheap to produce. So they're coming over here and they're taking advantage of the communities that not solely have legalized drugs or decriminalized drugs, which is just a different way of saying legalized. Sure. But what they've done in these Democrat-run cities, they've adopted something called harm reduction. This policy basically says we are going to, quote unquote, reduce the harm associated with illicit substances. So when you're handing out crack pipes, when you're handing out clean needles, that's a form of harm reduction. The problem with that strategy is that they do not push any kind of treatment. It is very rare to push treatment under the guise that it's lacking compassion when you stigmatize a user and try to get them into treatment. Sure. That's absolutely absurd, and that's precisely why we've seen it fail, and the body count just continue to go up. And again, this is not just happening in these Democrat-run cities. They're not Las Vegas. What happens in Seattle or New York or DC, that spreads. And it's going to get into other communities and smaller cities, including in red counties and red states. In fact, they're already there.
I got to ask you, so what solutions do you offer in terms of how we can, recreate or restore would be the word, the American cities? Because look, we know realistically speaking, the Democrats are going to continuously be elected in these cities. I don't see change coming anytime soon. I actually see people leaving cities more and more. What do you think can happen at least to stop the bleeding?
To stop the bleeding, number one, you have to not just know what's happening, you have to know why it's happening. That is the most important part of this. You have to know why certain folks believe what they believe, because that's the only way you're going to debate and truly let other people know what's going on. And that is the cornerstone of this book, telling you why they are choosing to go down this path. It's obviously driven by ideology, but why do they think this is going to work? There are clear examples when it comes to homelessness, crime, drug addiction, of programs and policies that actually work. They're being implemented right now on the ground in cities all across the country. The problem is there's not really a cheerleader when it comes to some of those programs, because when you are one of the outliers offering a carrot and stick approach to homelessness, for example, well, that flies in the face of this harm reduction strategy. When you're telling people that, hey, we'll give you some subsidized housing, but there's going to be some conditions. That works, but it flies in the face of a left-wing view called housing first.
Yes.
So no one is really there to push forward. And I guarantee you that I can go out right now and ask random people, can you define harm reduction, housing first, all of these strategies that the left has implemented? They would have no clue what it is I'm talking about. And yet, those are the policies that are destroying our cities. And so if you don't know what's going on and the why behind it, you're not going to be able to get together with like-minded people to actually push back and make better decisions.
We're starting to see, for example, in cities like New York City, where, individuals have come out and said, this flow of illegal immigration, it's impacting our schools from a negative standpoint. We can't house them. It's too much money. Do you think there's going to be enough of individuals standing up against this lawlessness, against this chaos that we're seeing in the cities?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is we don't know how long it's going to take until we get to that critical mass of actually making a change.
Yeah.
A perfect example, I think, is San Francisco. San Francisco has been deteriorating for a while, but during COVID, because of all the policies that have been sort of pushed through, you saw the deterioration come really quickly, and people are fleeing, businesses are fleeing. But at some point, the residents did say, hey, this is too much. They ended up recalling Chesa Boudin, the George Soros wannabe prosecutor. They ended up removing from office all of the school board members that they were able to, that were actually up for a potential recall. That was a success. And it wasn't driven by conservatives, the 12 conservatives who live in San Francisco. This was like hardcore progressive saying, we've gone too far.
Right.
Now, the problem with San Francisco is that it might have been a little too late. I legitimately think we're seeing the death of San Francisco in real time, and I want to prevent that from happening in a New York or Chicago, DC, Seattle, Portland, all these other cities. There is growing interest in why everything is happening. You just have to make it really easy for people to figure it out so that they know how to have these conversations and be a more informed voter. And again, that's what went into what's killing America.
Let's hone in here on the fact that we're moving obviously into 2024 presidential election. You and I will be very busy during that time. Well, we already started getting really busy. You're watching these poll numbers come in, and I do think crime's going to play a big role. I think immigration's going to play a big role. Obviously, the economy, which is impacting American families every day. What's your sense? Will Biden be the Democrat nominee? I know that there's these rumors out there that of even Democrats saying have him step aside. What are you hearing? What's your sense as to how things are going to play out here?
So at the end of the day, everything still points to it's going to be Biden versus Donald Trump. That's what everything points to. Can something change? Yes. Am I finding myself being pushed more and more to the side of I think Biden's not going to actually be the nominee and something's going to happen where he steps aside? Yes. Do I think that that is going to be the reality at this point? No, but I'm starting to consider that as a serious possibility. I think, to your point, people are talking about this because people obviously understand they've got a huge problem with Joe Biden and his age. Pushing aside his entire record as president and the impacts he's had, the negative impacts he's had on so many things, push that aside. People look at him and they see a 112-year-old man who's running this country, and they don't like that. Yeah. They're not comfortable with that. And I think that bodes well for former President Trump if he is in fact the nominee, because a lot of people, they don't like his personality necessarily, but they clearly had better lives under President Trump. And I think that people who maybe were on the fence or maybe were turned off by some of the tweets and whatnot, they were focused on some of the more vacuous criticisms, I think they're the ones who are going to say, you know what, I will put up with maybe a little aspect of his personality I don't like because of how bad Joe Biden will be as a president, and really how bad Kamala Harris would be as a president.
It's breaking this week that Speaker McCarthy is announcing a formal impeachment inquiry against President Biden, talking about, quote, abuse of power, obstruction, and corruption. How do you think this impeachment inquiry will have an impact as we go into the election?
So we all have to understand one basic fact going into this. It's going to be inaccurately portrayed by mainstream media outlets because they are overwhelmingly left-wing. Right. So they're going to color and shade this as best as they can in a negative. There's a potential for this to really blow up on the Republican side if it is not clear what crimes were committed. and you can't do a press conference talking about all of these different shell companies because it's impossible to follow. It's very difficult to understand. And you and I get paid to look at this stuff and actually understand. Like it's difficult to follow, and it's not going to be a convincing argument. However, the fact of the matter is, because of the concerns over the age, because finally the Hunter Biden scandals are starting to really connect with the American people, it's hard to escape from it. It is all going to kind of just be digested as, this guy is just so much drama. We just have to move on. So in that regard, I think it can actually help the Republicans. They just have to be very careful and strategic about how they're presenting this to the American people.
I think that's great advice. Well, you can pre-order your book, What's Killing America. Where can you buy the book, and when is it going to be released?
Yeah, so it's officially released on September 26th. I actually got my copy. Look at this.
Yay,
look how this is a heavy book.
I know.
So everyone should go ahead and pre-order it. It's available wherever it is you get your books: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart.com, Books A Million. And as I think many conservative authors know, it's much more difficult for conservatives to get on any sort of bestseller list. They don't always treat us fairly. And so pre-orders especially are the most important part of this. So I would really appreciate if people could go ahead and pre-order. It's available hardcover, audiobook, as well as electronic.
Well, the one thing you know, and you've been with the CPAC family for a long time, we've got a big group of grassroots out there who are very active in their communities. We need to support Jason. So go get his book, What's Killing America. And Jason, thank you for joining America Uncanceled. And I pray to God I see you sooner rather than later, but I know I'll see you at CPAC if not.
I know you will see me there as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And remember, if you missed an episode, you can always go back and watch on our website. Just go to cpac.org/now or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next time. God bless.